Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions. If we are unable to get to them during the presentation, they will be answered at the end. My name is Braden Knutson. I will be your host for this webinar. Today we'll be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled, What's in That Pile? Organization for the Disorganized Genealogist. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. We're here again with another BYU Family History Library webinar. I'd like to remind you that these webinars are being recorded and they will be available and uploaded both to the BYU Family History Library website, which is part of BYU EDU, that's Brigham Young University's general website, or on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. We'd also like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and invite others to subscribe also, so you'll get notification of all the videos that are being uploaded. Today we're going to talk about what's in that pile, organization for the disorganized genealogist. We really have to be, I think you could probably measure the degree of dedication of a genealogist by the amount of paper and other things that they have accumulated in huge piles. We have a tendency to accumulate a lot of information, including original documents and certificates, photocopies of documents and certificates, working papers and notes, books and diaries and publications, conference syllabi, and candy wrappers, greeting cards, movie tickets, and all sorts of other things that happen to get put in the same boxes or included with all the stuff that you get. And as we accumulate this stuff, if you are one of these very, very diligent people who immediately files and organizes and puts everything in order, then you really are on top of the situation, although I'm probably going to disagree a little bit later on in the presentation. But the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we mean by organization? When we're talking about getting organized, we have different things. When I say I'm getting organized, that doesn't mean the same thing as you might think when you say I need to get organized. The first question, I guess, is, do we mean tidying up the mess? In other words, is getting organized straightening your pile? Is it getting the file cabinet so it will close? Are those the kinds of things that are included with your idea of organization? Or does organization go deeper than that? And do we need to ask ourselves whether or not the organization is going to be beneficial to what we're actually doing? There are lots of different degrees of organization. Do we mean by organizing that we create a filing system where we put all of the things we have into organized files? Or does it make things easier to be found once they're put in files? This is kind of an interesting situation because I've been faced with this throughout my rather long legal career, and we had a lot of paper. You can't, genealogists create paper. Attorneys manufacture it at a high speed. So you have to go, there's a big difference there. I guess another question that needs to be asked is, what are we using as a standard for organization? Now, this reminds me of when I was in school, and I mean like grade school and high school type school, and even into college. I had the same feelings of insecurity and feeling like I was really out of the loop. Um, a couple of examples. One of the things that used to always make me feel inferior was to go into a class and have these people who were super organized, who had their files all in three-ring binder notebooks. Everything looked perfectly punched, and all the papers were straight and everything. And at the same time, of course, I carried everything in one pack and stuffed everything into the pack. And whatever came out, came out. Whatever didn't, moved to the bottom of the pack, and along with the old candy wrappers and everything else. And so basically, uh, I would look at my pile of paper, I'd look at their beautifully designed color-coded notebooks, and I would feel like I was missing something in life. Um, it's interesting, though, that in a lot of cases they got the same grade I did, which was kind of surprising always to me. Uh, the the second part of this was going into the university setting when I became much involved in undergraduate and graduate school. And especially I remember the first few days of law school, which was a traumatic experience to say the least. And I walked into the law school class, which are in this particular the school that I went to, which was Arizona State University. They were these amphitheater kind of classes with stepped up chairs, seats all the way up into the rafters. And of course, since my name was Tanner, I was in the last row of the last section and clear up at the top, so I could get a pretty good view of everybody. And as we started these classes, I would watch these students there just, scribbling mightily. I mean, they were taking notes like the world was going to end. They were all so organized. They put it all in notebooks. They had note cards. They had everything. And I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, well, maybe I should be taking notes. And so I started taking notes. And of course, when I got them home, I couldn't read a word I said. I had no idea what they said. They were totally disorganized and disjointed. So eventually, by the time I had been through a semester or so of law school, I gave up on the whole idea of taking notes. But that's just like I say, what are we using as a standard? Are we getting organized because organization is something we do or need or have to do, or is organization simply something that somebody else thinks is a good idea because they think we are disorganized? Okay, so those are kinds of things that we really need to address when we're involved in an information-based pursuit like genealogy. Um, so I guess what it gets down to is, are we talking about organization meaning clean and neat? If we are, then we're probably in the wrong business, because I don't think that we can remain clean and neat and manage a whole lot of paper at the same time. And so this is, there's a way to handle it, and we can probably do it, but there's lots of different methods out there that people have. But we're going to talk about the essence of organization rather than uh, some little new method of getting there. I guess the epitome for me when I'm working with genealogists and talking to them is the person who comes in with a perfectly organized giant three-ring binder, or two or three of these giant three-ring binders, with page protectors for all of their documents and all of their family group records and everything. There's a problem here, though, and this is what I've run into, is that you'll begin to ask the person a question. You'll say, well, who are you looking for this today? How can I help you? And they'll say, well, just a minute. And they'll go through their book and thumb through pages and turn the pages and turn. And they'll say, I'm looking for this person right here. And I'll say, well, how is he related to you? And they'll go, well, just a minute. Then they'll turn some more pages. They'll spend more time, turning pages than than they will asking me questions or getting help. Are page protectors the answer? Are we looking for total protection of all of our wonderful notes and documents that we've obtained? Um, so what I think we need to do is understand that there is a basic difference between archiving and storing. Archiving or archivists have to do with preservation. And when we're talking and focusing in on preservation, we have a different standard, we have a different um, use a different methodology than we do if we're merely storing information, storing the documents, storing whatever it is that we have. Now, one of the worst cases that I can think of is someone who organizes, and I've run into this now a number of times as I've inherited documents and photographs and things, is the person who put all of their photographs into a uh, photograph album. And the worst cases that I've seen in this matter was one of my relatives that I ended up with all of their documents and their photograph albums is number one, the albums themselves had become water soaked. So they were moldy, literally covered with mold. And on the second part of it is they had glued down all the photographs. And so the descriptions of what was in the photographs were on the back side of the photographs, glued to these black uh, kind of pressed cardboard pages that they used to use for photographic albums. Okay, so try working that. That's storage without archiving. Archiving would be more concerned with preserving and maintaining the integrity and the readability and preserving the document than they would simply putting it in a box and sticking it in the basement or putting it in onto a shelf someplace. So that's something they're extremely involved. Now the picture here that we're looking at is the Library of Congress of the United States, or the United States Archives in Washington D.C. And this is the storing part of it. This is storing stuff. Archiving has to do with some very important parts of the process, which is retrieval. If it's stored, you may or may not be able to find it. If it's archived, you should be able to find whatever it is you're looking for, and you should know that you have it. Now, the National Archives of the United States is not the best example that we can use of an archiving organization. They actually measure the contents of the National Archives in cubic feet of documents. And they basically do not have any idea what is in all of those containers that they've created for all those documents. So they have them by classifications and they have them by category, but a very small, infinitesimally small number of the documents in the United States Archives have been digitized and are available other than searching through piles of paper. So if we want to preserve genealogically valuable original documents, which is one method of being organized and one way and one emphasis, which I think from our standpoint, a genealogist should be the most important one, then we need some guidelines. And the place where we can go to get these guidelines is the Library of Congress preservation pages. If you go to the Library of Congress website, which is loc.gov or loc.gov, and if you go down in the lower right-hand corner of their website, there's a big menu on that front page of the Library of Congress website. You'll see a section called Preservation, and the Preservation section gives you by category of documents or items that you would like to preserve the standards and the best methods, current methods of preservation and organization that are available to archivists and to others around the country. There are also just dozens, hundreds of links to other archive sites on every possible subject. So if you want to know how to preserve books or photographs or any type of record, the Library of Congress preservation section will give you a very specific and easy to understand explanation of what needs to be done to preserve all of these different kinds of documents. Okay, so I'm going to have to submit this. This, of course, is my opinion, but after years and years and years of handling tens of thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands of documents, I have to say that neatness does not necessarily equal organization. I have seen people who are superbly neat, uh, but are totally disorganized. So we need to go beyond neatness to actual organization of our records. And the key question in here is, can you find it? Do you know what's there? And can you find it? If you know what's there, then you should be able to find it. If you can't find it, then you're not organized. I think that's my basic definition of organization, is the ability to retrieve or find whatever it is that you have in your piles. Okay, the first questions you should be asking yourself is sort of a filtering process here, where we're going to filter the stuff that we're gathering. And the first question you would ask yourself is, are you ever going to review those notes? If you are going to take notes, like my compatriots at the law school, then you'll need to review them. And as I've already indicated in my case, my review of my own notes was somewhat disappointing, to say the least. And so my question is, why was I taking notes? Well, for me, that worked. It was better for me to sit there and listen carefully than it was for me to try to write down and copy down something that the person was saying. This was pre when you could walk in with a tape recorder and record everything the professor had to say. So we weren't in that mode at the time. In fact, some of the professors, I'm sure, would have objected on constitutional and academic grounds for having their lectures recorded anyway. Second question, will you ever read that syllabus again? Okay, that's another thing that we want to know about. And when I'm mentioning these things like notes and syllabus, syllabi, then you really need to be able to substitute whatever it is that you've accumulated in those questions. And the next question is, does this document, or whatever, have historical significance? Now, one of the questions that I get constantly is, what should I say? What is it that is important? What's to say? And the answer to that is that we save whatever it is that will provide us, researchers, with the answers to who, what, why, when, where, and other questions that we may have about our ancestors. So if the records and documents that you have answer any of those questions, if they identify people, if they explain how they lived, what they said, what they did, when they did it, where they did it, anything along those lines, then they are documents that need to be preserved. Anything else is basically optional, whether or not you're going to keep it or not. This also is kind of a catch question, is the item an original source? That means, is this the only place, excuse me, is this the only place that this particular item can be found? If you have your great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather's original handwritten journal, that is an original source. That is a valuable historical document. It is something that needs to be preserved, and probably needs to be preserved in a institutional setting. It needs to go to a library or to an archive or to a historical society, some organization that is dedicated to preserving and keeping and maintaining that kind of document. On the other hand, if you have pictures that your children drew during grade school, and you still have a huge box full of all of their gifts, all of their little drawings and things like this, I suggest that you bundle those up and give them to them. Let them keep them if they wish, but unless they have some valid historical document. Now, here's the dividing line. The 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 continental divide, if you will, in this subject is emotional attachment as opposed to actual historical genealogical value. Okay. So the real question to ask, the final bottom question in a sense, is will I ever need to look at this document again? Um, that then becomes an issue of your personal judgment as opposed to a professional view of the documents as historical artifacts. You may never want to look at it again, but that doesn't mean it gets thrown away. What that means is you need to answer the first questions first. That is, does the document have historical significance? Is it an original source? If it is, then it needs to be disposed of in a way that it maintains its integrity and not thrown in the dumpster. Okay, so what helps? What is it that helps us to get organized? Does color coding help? I can look online and see dozens, perhaps hundreds of different very, very detailed schemes for color coding documents. Um, Secondly, uh, how about multiple file folders with labels? That sounds like a really good solution to everybody's problem. Labeling and putting it in. Um, my question about file folders and color coding and genealogy is pretty interesting because my question here is how do you show relationships with your color coding and your file folders? Um, for example, one of the most obvious things that I see people do all the time is they divide up their genealogy by surname. So you have the first surname in one folder, and then you divide it up by your grandparents. So you have 4 filing systems, 4 color codes. The red ones go with the paternal grandfather, and the green ones go with the maternal grandfather, and so forth like that. And or you have a file folder for the Brown family, and you have another file folder for the Schmedley family, and you have another one for whatever family you have. Okay, that's great, but what happens if those people marry each other? Which folder they go in? In my case, my parents were cousins. So how do we file folder the cousins? Is my father a Christensen or is he a Tanner? Is my mother a Christensen or is she a Morgan? And so these are the kinds of things that file folders don't do well. How about numbering schemes? We have historically and in genealogy, we have a whole bunch of different numbering schemes. Some of you may have heard of the Anatophel scheme, and there's other kinds of generational schemes. Number 1 is the first generation number. Second space over is the number second generation. So your number 1, 2 person, and traditional family group records, by the way, and pedigree charts are designed to be numbered. So you create a numbering system that corresponds to a pedigree chart, and the pedigree chart then becomes your numbering scheme. Unfortunately, all of these schemes become unworkable at the quantity of documents that can be created and the fact that many of them don't fall within any of these particular categories of records. Okay, so the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we have any examples of organizational schemes that work with large numbers of files and documents? Is there anybody out there working with lots of data, lots of items? The answer is yes, there is. Who? Libraries. Okay, so first of all, we already have examples of how to have one method of organization by going to your public library or a university library or any place where we have a library. And you can see how they organize a lot of information. And secondly, we have professional offices. Doctors and lawyers handle a lot of information, and they have different ways of organizing their files. And then we have archives. How do the archives work? Do they are they able to retrieve the documents that you're looking for? Okay, so if we look to these organizations rather than coming up with our own individual fabulous way of organizing, then we may be able to see why they can expand sort of exponentially with the amount of information that they handle without breaking down. Their system doesn't break down. But we need to look at these systems to see what works and what doesn't work. Okay, first of all, we're going to look at a little bit at library organization. How do libraries organize their material? Have you asked yourself this as far as your own systems, perhaps? I do know people who have set up their own personal library system, and it works for them. So this is one method of organizing. Um, so what do they do? What's the basis of library organization? Uh, the basis for organizing a library is a numbering system. And there are two different kinds of numbering systems. First of all, there's based on the location within the library system. In other words, the material in the library is divided into levels of classification, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 or more different levels of classification. And different classifications are assigned different physical locations within the library. The most common of these is the Dewey Decimal System, where the classification numbers are printed on the back of the material or on a label on the material, and the numbering system determines exactly where they are in the library. Now, when I come into the BYU Family History Library, it is contained within the main University of Brigham Young University Library, the Harold B. Lee Library. And the Lee Library on every floor and in multiple locations on every floor of this very, very large library has their classification system, which is sort of a modified Dewey Decimal System. And you locate books by looking at the map, which tells you the general area where certain classification numbers are. For example, I was looking in the T classifications the other day, and that directed me to some place on the second floor, clear back, looked like a tunnel that I was going into underground, miles into the interior of the earth. And I found the book that I was looking for because it was classified and organized according to this Dewey Decimal System. There is a completely separate, absolutely different system for organization of libraries, and it's based on the order of acquisitions. These are called accession numbers, and the Library of Congress applies an accession number to each of its items. So they are grouped together physically by subject and by classification, but the individual items themselves are each numbered as they come into the system. So for example, the first document that was given to the Library of Congress became item number 1. The next item became item number 2, the next 3, so forth. And so each item is uniquely identified by a number, and then the information concerning that document is put into a catalog, and then the catalog is organized by subject headings, but the individual entries are identified uniquely by their acquisition or accession number. Okay, so there's two different ways of handling the information. In a lot of cases, in both cases, however, with a formal library, the documents, books, and other things are physically segregated so that they can be found. Um, Here's something that I learned very early on as I worked in libraries. I worked at the University of Utah Library while I was in undergraduate and graduate school, and then again I worked in the ASU Law Library while I was attending law school. I learned something very interesting. That is, their classification systems and cataloging systems were still based on being able to find the documents. And it was interesting because I found the same documents and the same or similar subjects located in two and three and maybe even as many as three or four different places in the library. So even though their system was supposed to be totally inclusive, they were still not completely organized even if they had a mixture of all three, where they had some type of numbering system and an accession system that showed the acquisition and also moved things around physically. So, and I think this is sort of epitomized by the old card catalog. Um, One of my jobs in the library was called being a bibliographer, which was a long-term for simply looking things up in the catalog mostly. And as a result of that, we found out that the catalog numbers were based on a categorization that was somewhat arbitrary. So they had catalog numbers, they had accession numbers, and they had items arranged in physical locations. And notwithstanding this system, they still had similar items in different areas of the library. And I was only able to actually discover that by walking the shelves. In other words, walking up and down the shelves and looking at the material and examining and pulling books off the shelf was the only way that I ultimately found everything that the library had on a certain subject. Now, the key here is they maintained all of this by a master catalog. Originally, they were the paper catalog that I showed, and now virtually every library in the country of any size has transitioned over to some kind of a computerized cataloging system. Now, what goes wrong with libraries? First of all, the numbering system is arbitrary, so there's no exact correlation between the numbers and the subjects. That's the first problem. You can't just look at a number unless you are extremely experienced in the numbering system of a particular library, or if you have memorized the Dewey Decimal System catalog classifications or the Library of Congress classification system, which, by the way, is huge. The Dewey Decimal System is somewhat limited in its divisibility down to the small numbers. If you look at Dewey Decimal numbers, you know that they end up being like 151.576 ZQR, things like that. And those are kind of arbitrarily created. So there's no real way to look at that number and determine what the item is. They're slow and tedious. Cataloging is not a fast process in libraries, and there usually is a backlog of uncatalogued material in any library of any size. Classification or cataloging never seems to keep up with acquisition. Even under budget cuts, it seems like they're always the budget cutting always hits the cataloging, and so the libraries are still behind even when they aren't able to afford to purchase a lot of items. So it's an interesting process, and it creates a situation where there's an overburden of unclassified material in most libraries, especially large libraries. Additionally, is that if an item is misshelved, it is generally lost. Um, A library like the BYU library here employs people to do what are called read the shelves. Their job in the library is to go down the shelves and make sure that the books are all in the right order. And if they find things that are out of order, then they're supposed to reshelve them and do it. If you're in a large library like this, or like the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah, you will see big notices on almost every shelf that says, put your items here for reshelving. In other words, they do not want the patrons, the people who are using the library, to put the items back on the shelf. They want the trained library employees or volunteers or whoever is running the library to do the shelving so that items are not misshelved and essentially disappear off the face of the library's earth because of their misshelving. Now, what does this have to do with you as an individual researcher? Well, if you're listening to the positives and the negatives of these systems, you'll see the same kinds of positives and negatives showing up in your own personal so-called organizational system. So you need to understand that by learning how they're done, how items are cataloged in these major institutions, that is a way that you can learn how to catalog and organize your own material in a way that is easy to maintain, keeps up with the acquisition issue, and also provides so that when something is misshelved or miscatalogued, it doesn't vanish off the face of the earth. And then I've mentioned this already, that some of the items classified in different, or the same items are classified in different categories. So depending on the person who looked at the item and how they viewed it, the same document could have been categorized in two different locations. There's also not a very high or significant level problem, but there is a problem of always trying to avoid duplication. And actually, that was my job as a bibliographer at the University of Utah Library, was an attempt to avoid ordering duplicate items which were already in the library that professors and others within the university system had requested. Okay, so this is an ongoing problem. One of the issues, of course, that applies to genealogy is that I inherited a very large number of documents from one of my great grandmothers, and actually from two great grandmothers separately. But the one, it was thousands, tens of thousands of documents, and out of these thousands of documents, it happened that as I went through her genealogy, that she had been involved in doing research over a long period of time, probably more than 30 years, and during that time period had redone and researched all of the people in her file at least 3 times. So she had 3 complete copies of everything that she'd done. Now, it wasn't done, I can't assume that it was done because she wanted to do it that way or that she needed to do it over again. It was simply a matter that she had lost track of the amount of information that she had and had no efficient way of determining whether she had actually looked at these people before. Okay, so let's move on to a different kind of example. This one is where the key is the ability to find something. And the epitome of that, I think, from my own experience, is the law office. The law office, if you lose a document, you can really be in trouble, particularly if it's an original document or something that was owned by or needed necessary for one of your clients. And losing a document in the law firm was a major issue. In fact, the entire law firm, my particular law firm, would come to a screeching halt if a crucial document had been lost, and it began the process of searching through every file everywhere in order to see if the document had somehow been misfiled. Okay, so how are they organized? Well, the law firm had everything organized. Documents were filed by the name of the client. If a client had more than one number, then there was a number given to the client, and the client was each of the individual succeeding cases or causes or matters, as we call them, were given a number. So this was kind of an accession sort of system. As a client came in, a file or was open, and if they added additional matters, then additional files were opened with the same client name and client number and a subname of the matter number to be filed. And all of this was filed alphabetically and or numerically. So they were filed by client name and then by the number of the client matter or the name of the client matter, depending on how the particular attorney handled that particular aspect of the filing system. And then everything was put into the file as it was received in chronological order. So one of the first early systems we had a file folder with a metal clasp system, and everything was two-hole punched at the top of the page, and so they went right into the file in chronological order. If things got out of chronological order, then it became a serious matter, and it was not infrequently that a file was given back to a secretary with the cheerful request. Let's just say it wasn't sometimes cheerful, but it was a request to go through and put this file back in order. So that was sort of one of the common things that would happen. And depending on the what kind of a deadline we were facing, that could become a major issue for the personnel who worked in the office. Then these files were maintained physically on shelves or in boxes by client. Okay, so ultimately, if the file became inactive, it was moved into a box, and if it was onto a shelf, and if it then if it became totally inactive or closed, as we referred to it as, then it was put into storage. It was not infrequent that we were sending people down to the storage rooms to go through files and see if they could find the old file because it had suddenly become resurrected and back into use. Now, this starts to sound more and more like the systems that are used by genealogists. Many genealogists file their documents by their surnames, name of the person that they're researching, understanding that the number of surnames that you're involved with it grows exponentially. Many kind of what I would call casual genealogists focus on a surname or one or two surname lines. So they're interested in investigating their surname line back and kind of ignore all of the other surnames that are generated by the spouses of the direct line. But that's kind of like the client organization for law offices. So these are maintained by these clients. The question then, what happens if two clients merge or they get married or all sorts of things that can happen in a law firm, and that created some very interesting filing situations. And of course, we have to mention what I just mentioned a moment ago, active versus inactive. An inactive file was in a different category than an active file, and the inactive files were generally processed into storage containers, usually banker boxes, and put on shelves someplace until they were moved to some off-site storage location. Now, what's wrong? What goes wrong with the law office storage system? First of all, misfiled documents were impossible to find. When I was finally retiring from the practice of law and was going through the few files that I had that were left open and the few files that had been sorted, I was absolutely appalled to find out that many of the documents that I had thought were lost in forever were actually sitting in some random file someplace. Um, some of the attorneys that I worked for, filing system was to grab the nearest file and stick the document into it rather than uh, care where it went or whether it was even related to the same subject. Some of the attorneys that we've had to examine their files afterwards find all sorts of extraneous things stuck in files. So, the fact that you have these filing systems and the fact that they are based on a method of keeping track of all of the information that comes in does not necessarily guarantee that things won't disappear and get lost. Um, the retrieval of the old documents is very difficult. I can't emphasize how time-consuming it was to have someone physically go down and walk through and open box after box and go through file after file trying to find a missing document. So some of us who are genealogists and have big filing systems or lack of thereof probably can relate to the moving of the boxes and opening them up and trying to figure out where the stuff is. And the law, as example, the system assumes document destruction after 7 years of inactivity. Now, the 7 years was what we had in Arizona. That may not be the same length of time required in your state, but whether it be an accountant or an attorney or whatever, they are only under the obligation of keeping a file for a certain time period. And when they get to the end of that time period, it goes to the trash. Now, this is not a good example for genealogists because genealogists stretch their research over a lifetime, perhaps, and the information and documents they have, as I've already talked about, can be a very, very important preservation issues. Okay, so what does an archive do? Archives are kind of mixtures of both the library and professional offices. They do things in two different ways. They classify documents by topic, and then they're sorted by donor. So if you go into an archive, like special collections and university library special collections, you will find papers. So you may find the John Smith papers, and that John Smith papers classified as a certain amount of documents expressed in linear feet. So you may have 6 linear feet of documents, and then you will have a brief summary by classification of the contents of those documents. That's it, folks. It's organized, you could find it, but as a researcher, you really have to know a lot more about your topic to find something in an archive than you do in a library or even in a law office. So they also use the inherent library numbering system. So whatever numbering system is used by the library that they're associated with or that has been adopted by the archive organization. And then they are physically arranged by topic, categories on shelves or in boxes. Now, the shelves for a large archive may be arranged simply by order of acquisition. So in other words, as they have free shelf space, they will stick the next thing they get in the next open shelf space. So they are, in a sense, acquiring, they're organizing by acquisition. Now, what's wrong with the archives? All the same things as libraries. Unrelated items are grouped and filed together. No way to find an individual item without physical search of the contents of the boxes. And there's no way to know if items are in the box at all. So these are some really interesting limitations. I was once listening to an interview the Harvard University librarian, the Harvard University librarian, the person in charge of all the libraries. And the question was being asked him is, wasn't everything in the library digitized? And he said, in response, he said, oh my goodness, no. He said, we have well over 100 uncatalogued manuscripts. We have over 1 million uncatalogued manuscripts in the Harvard Library. So, we're talking about masses of information that have escaped the ability of larger organizations. And I think this happens too with genealogists on their personal things. So what's wrong with all of them? First of all, the contents of the items are not necessarily identified. The information generally and not specifically characterized. You have to read the books to find out what's in the books. You have to look at and items are easily lost if they're misfiled or misshelved. So those are some things. This all makes research very time consuming and tedious. And so that's the essence of research, is the ability of people to plow through all of this information and find it and digest it and use it in a useful fashion. Okay, so let's look at organization. What's the first rule of organization then? The first rule of my organization system is never do anything a computer can do faster and better. Okay, so if you can do it on a computer and it can help you get organized, then do it with computers. Don't try to do it yourself. Don't try to put things in file folders if computers don't need it. Don't put things on shelves physically organized if you don't need to. And the second part of do is what you have to do is let the computer, what do you have to do to let the computer do its job? That's the base question here. We've been given these tools, these computers that can organize our material, so now we need to use them. So first of all, the computers need to be able to search the documents and their contents. And that's our job. Our job is to put the material into a form that the computer can use to find it, because the computer is going to be able to search documents better, faster, and easier than we can. So here's the general rule. Digitize everything. So every piece of paper that comes into your possession should be digitized. Then the second part of that is you use a scanner, use a camera, whatever it is that you'd have to create a digital copy of the document. Then use descriptive file names. Make sure that when you put it into a file that the file to the very least gives you enough information to know what it is that you have there on that digital paper, that file that's a copy of a piece of paper. Use names, dates, places in file names. Make sure you understand what it is that you're looking at. Secondly, identify the source with the file name. So here's an example of a good file name. Marriage record for Jonas Brun and Anna Nordstrom in Uddevalla, Gothenburg och Bohus, Sweden in 1826. Okay, so there's you go. There's a file name that lets you find that particular document, gives you at least a clue of what you're looking at and what it is on that digitized piece of paper there that's been put into a computer file. Then tag the names. Okay, so that means that you need a program that allows you to identify the people who are involved so that those people then become associated with the individuals in your family files. This example that I'm using here comes from FamilySearch.org, and FamilySearch.org has a section called Memories, and the Memory section allows you to add in photos, documents, stories, and audio files, and tag them to each individual in this vast online family tree, and also give them titles which can be searched by the computer. So we have more than one way to find the specific information we're looking for, but the process is tedious and slow, and that is that each document and each photo and each item entered has to be named, given a title, and then tagged to the individuals who are um, concerned with that particular document. Once that done, and you have tagged names and places of everything in all the documents that you have, then you have a system where the computer can find those documents faster and easier than you could if you were pawing through banker boxes or looking through stacks of paper or even notebooks or even file folders full of documents and items. Wait, I'm not moving. So the next thing is to organize it on the computer and understand that computers don't care about color coding, and they don't care about file folders, and they don't care about all of the other little fancy ways of organizing. All they really are interested in is whether or not the information is tagged and titled. And if it's possible that the documents are examined by optical character recognition, that makes it even better, because by doing an optical character recognition of the documents, you're able to find them even more. And the holy grail, if you will, the end ultimate goal of the genealogists and those who are cataloging documents is to be able to do optical character recognition of handwritten documents, which right now is in the very, very preliminary stages of being accomplished. So if we use the existing genealogy programs, because we're already organized by our biological nature into family trees, then we have our organization, our classification, if you will. And because we're already organized, there's no need to come up with another system. We can simply use the system that's already there, and that is our relationships to all the other people to whom we are related in our family tree. So we are organized by family. And then here is, for example, a page from the people section of the photos on FamilySearch.org. In that case, there's a whole bunch of photos here. The question is, how am I related to these people? And if I then go to the FamilySearch.org memories, I can pick up a person that allows me to tag that person and attach that tag to that person's file in the detail page in the program, and then I can come back and find that person at any time. So the answer here is to use the program you already have, the program that you've been using as a basis for organizing all your information. If you have your own database on your own computer, or if you're using one online, then simply make sure that all of the documents that you have and all of the information that you have is put into these computer programs, because then it is automatically organized, it's findable, and things are probably not going to get lost unless you unintentionally or whatever attach it to the wrong person or whatever. But even then, it's possible, if your documents are searchable and if the titles you've given your files are identified, then you'll be able to find that even if it were attached to the wrong person, which is different. Now, I have to admit that in both the case of the law office and the library, that both of those organizations, nationally and individually across the world, are becoming more and more digitized, more and more available. By the time I retired from the practice of law, the court system in Arizona had become mandatory, what they call e-file only, meaning they only took electronic documents. They no longer would take any kind of paper at the court. So the long lines of people filing documents at the court had disappeared because they no longer took paper from anyone. They still had some lines, but those were for certification of documents and other purposes where original documents had to be filed. But in most of the cases, there were no longer filings. Okay, well, thanks for watching. That's sort of the summary. The idea here is that if you use the system that you already have, use your genealogy program as the basis for your organization, digitize all of your documents. That does not mean you throw them away. What that means is that you preserve and keep those that are historically and genealogically important. But on the other hand, for your organization purposes, you no longer have to worry about which box it's in, which file folder it's in, whether it's red, blue, green, or yellow, but you simply have to go to your program and see what documents are attached to what person, and you are automatically organized. It may seem oversimplistic, and to some it may seem unsatisfactory because it isn't pretty, it isn't tidy, but it is very, very effective, and it does work. Thanks for watching. This is a BYU Family History Library webinar, and these are recorded and put online on the BYU Family History Library website and also on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And if you go to the YouTube channel, take time to subscribe. We'd appreciate you getting notices of all of our subsequent and future videos. Thank you.
Great. We'd like to thank James for a wonderful webinar and all the hard work that he puts in to help us out here at the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We'd love to have some feedback to let us know how we can improve our webinars and make them a little bit better. Feel free to answer the poll here with any improvements or comments that we could do. Also, if you have any other comments or suggestions, feel free to email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for participating with us.